everyone, and thank you very much for joining NCCoE and NextLabs for our webinar titled Implementing Flexible Access Controls, Best Practices from the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. My name is Tiffany, and I'm happy to host this webinar. I am proud to introduce today's speakers, Bill Fisher and Roger Wigginstown. Bill is a security engineer at the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. As a part of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, an agency within the Department of Commerce, the center is dedicated to increasing the rate of adoption of practical cybersecurity solutions. Roger is the VP of Product Management at NextLabs and is responsible for NextLabs' strategy and product roadmap. Before joining NextLabs, Roger was Senior Director of Product Management for Identity and Access Management at Oracle for more than 5 years. Roger holds a Bachelor of Science degree with emphasis in System Analysis and Design from the University of Karlstad in Sweden. He has over 15 years of experience in enterprise software leading highly successful product management, engineering, and architecture teams. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Bill.
Hi, thank you everybody for joining us today on the webinar. I am Bill Fisher. I'm one of the security engineers here at the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. And I wanted to give you guys a brief presentation today to talk a little bit about what the NCCoE does in our mission space, and then more specifically talk about a recent project that we just released that focuses on attribute-based access control. And so for those of you who may not be familiar with the Center of Excellence, we like to refer to ourselves as sort of the applied space here at NIST. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. NIST is very well known for their standards, especially in the computer security space. Most of those standards come out of the computer security division. That's a colleague of ours here, or a sibling organization of ours here at the Center of NIST. And they put out a lot of great standards documents. The one that most people are familiar with is 800-53, which is listed as a comprehensive body of security controls for federal government, but also gets used in private sector as well. And so the center was stood up to actually do some worked examples, some actual demonstrations, some real-life demonstrations of standards and best practices. And so the thought was that, hey, the computer security division provides these great standards that sort of tell you what to do, but there's a lot of interpretation left for how to do it. And so that's the gap that the Center of Excellence fills. Many people ask us why we fall under the Department of Commerce, why such an applied cybersecurity space falls under us instead of DHS or NSA, some of our colleagues. And the answer to that is because we are focused on the acceleration of the adoption of secure technologies. And that there we see as something that's critical to U.S. businesses and enhancing their competitiveness and maintaining their competitiveness. And then so that's why we fall under the Department of Commerce. We help enhance and maintain the competitiveness of U.S. businesses by accelerating the adoption of secure technologies. So one might ask sort of how we go about executing this mission space. And so I put a brief slide in here to go over that. And so what we do is we enumerate cybersecurity business challenges from private sector and public sector and any members of our, as we call them, communities of interest, business stakeholders that we work with to talk about their cybersecurity challenges. And when we think we have one that's clearly defined, we will publish a white paper about that particular problem space. In this case, you're going to hear about the ABAC problem space. And we will then invite the IT security vendor community to come and work with us here at the National Center of Excellence in our labs to bring their technology and build out a solution that meets the cybersecurity challenge that was listed in the white paper. And so all of the technologies that you'll see today and the ones that we work with are all either commercially available through the IT vendors that have collaborated with us, or they're open source technology, or they're actually in some cases, there's like glue code or some code that the centers had to develop here, and we actually release that as public domain. So once we have established a challenge and we've teamed up with a selection of IT security vendors, then we get in our lab and we actually build out a solution right here at the Center of Excellence here in Rockville, Maryland. And the end result of that build will be a new form of NIST special publication. So as I mentioned before, many people are probably familiar with the NIST SP 800 series that the Computer Security Division puts out and is very much standards and best practices. The Center of Excellence publishes what we call practice guides, and those are SP 1800 series documents. And those include all of the necessary information so that any private or public sector entity who is interested in our project could replicate what we've done in our lab environments in their own environment. And so that means we include things such as the exact products that we use, the versions of those products, the firmware for those products, configuration files for those products, and also things like any of the glue code, as I previously mentioned, for those products. And we release them in that practice guide and for implementers to actually look through and potentially replicate in their own environment. So that was a quick overview of the center, but I know you're all here to talk about attribute-based access control, so I wanted to go into the specifics here of the project that we just completed. So I just mentioned that we put out practice guides, those SP 1800 series. For those of you who are interested, we just released a draft version of the ABAC one yesterday. It went live on the NCCoE website, and so feel free to take a look at that while I'm talking here and maybe generate some questions at the end in the Q&A, or there'll be plenty of contact information for us and you can ask us questions afterward. So first, let's start with the challenge. Why did the sort of center take on this challenge? And so the challenge really stems from some of the deficiencies that we've seen in many of the access control methods that are popular today. And the primary one is role-based access control, right? So what is role-based access control? It's a system where, as many of you know, because you are the operators of this type of system, where you are grouped into a bucket based on your role or your job type. And those roles or job types have associated permissions that allow you to access the objects and resources that you're allowed to access within your corporate network. But as that system has begun to evolve, and as we've seen IT infrastructure begin to evolve, we've started to notice some of the limitations of the RBAC model. And so here we talk about, really we see today a diversity of users. So whether it's users within the enterprise or users external to the enterprise, whether it's for various different types of resources, whether they be cloud-based or on-premise, collaborative resources. There's really a diversity of the user base these days, and there's a diversity of the access needs of that user base. And so trying to meet that diversity with a system like RBAC, where you're trying to define a role for each type of access that you need, or bunch multiple types of access under a single role, that really leads to a lot of roles that need to be managed. And here we say hundreds of roles, but depending on your organization, it may be thousands or even more than that. Additionally, when someone's role changes and their subsequent level of access changes, that access change typically needs to be reflected in multiple systems, and that's a change that oftentimes, if you're not integrating with Active Directory, needs to be made manually. And so that's rather laborious for administrators and the IT staff in general. And then in addition to that, as this access diversity increases, these systems become inefficient to manage, but also really hard to audit. You know, it's difficult when you're trying to find out who has access to what and when they've actually accessed it, especially if you're trying to aggregate logs across multiple systems, or having to go into multiple systems to get that type of information. So what is ABAC? So I wanted to give you guys a brief introduction, and I must admit I'm relying here on a definition from NIST 800-162, which is a document published by our colleagues at CSD. And they talk about ABAC as the evaluation of attributes of subject, attributes of object, and environmental conditions, and a formal relationship or access control rule defining allowable operations. And so what does that mean? It really means that you're establishing a policy that is a representation of a relationship between three types of attributes. And so those are subject attributes, are the ones that a user themselves would have assigned to them. One of those subject attributes can be role, just like in our role-based access control, but there's a whole other myriad of attributes you could put in there, such as certification and training, a specific project they might be assigned to, if you're with the government, a specific clearance they may have, or maybe if you're within private sector, access to something like proprietary information. And then also the name of the company, and you'll see why that's important a little later when we get into how ABAC crosses organizational boundaries. The second type of attribute is object attributes. So these are the attributes that characterize the actual resource that a user is trying to access. And those can be things like sensitivity. So again, it could be a proprietary document. It could be a classified document. The project, so whatever project that document might apply to. Things like division, so maybe it's a finance or a sales document. And then again, we have it on here twice, the project assignment, which is one that people really seem to attach to in the private sector. And then lastly, we have environmental attributes, and these are things that really add context to your access decisions. So when we are talking with a lot of data owners and a lot of risk decision makers within organizations, one of the things that they say is that not every single access request is the same, that you need context for each one of those access requests. And so here we represent them with environmental attributes, and I give some examples such as time of day. So if you have an IT staff and the IT staff has privileged access to your systems, you may want to say, well, I don't want to let a certain administrator have privileged access to my systems unless he's on duty. And so you can establish a time of day to say, well, he's a third shift guy, so he can have access in the middle of the night, but the second shift guy, I shouldn't see him accessing too much in the middle of the night. I should see him within his working window. You can also do things like geolocation, IP address, and potentially things like threat level. And really the extensibility of any of these attributes is sort of limited to whatever you can think up and wherever you can source the data. So for environmental attributes, you need a data source for that attribute, and we'll talk about how we've done that in our project. But you're not limited to these four. You can think of any environmental attribute you'd like that might best support your risk decisions, so long as you can find a data source for it. And so fundamentally, what does ABAC bring? What are some of the business benefits of ABAC? As with any access control system, it's meant to reduce the risk exposure, right? All organizations face the challenge of protecting sensitive customer information and business information and making sure that only the people that are authorized to access it can get access to it. So at its core, that's what ABAC is doing. But it has a few other unique pieces that aren't met by things like RBAC or some of the other access control methods that are out there that provide some advantages. One is the ability to externalize access control. So we talk about all of the different applications that might be in the environment. Each of these applications typically have some sort of native access control mechanism, but as you grow in the number of applications and you grow in the number of users, trying to go in and make sure that policy is represented accurately across those various applications is really difficult. And then it's just a manual process of going in and updating each of those applications to reflect the business policy or the risk tolerance of the organization. And so ABAC externalizes access control away from the actual application level. And then moving on to the third point here, it centralizes that access management. So it allows you to define access policy at one spot and then push that policy out to multiple applications. In addition to the centralization of the access management, it also reduces the complexity of compliance by centralizing where you audit. So the place where you define policy is also the place where you can audit that policy, see what type of access requests are actually being made, and then if you have an auditor come in, you can even show them, here are the policies we've defined in the system to say that only an HR specialist with PII training, let's say, can access the employee records, and you could reflect that in an attribute-based policy and then audit that. And then the last piece here is to allow for a wider range of risk decisions. And so, as I mentioned before, with RBAC, you're really sort of limited to that role as to how you can sort of define your risk tolerance, right? So you have to sort of say, yes, I'm going to allow the HR person to access these files or these resources. But under ABAC, since we have the addition of object attributes, subject attributes, and especially the environmental attributes, you can get much more granular in your policy definitions, and you can compose them of any number of these three types of attributes and say something very much more specific. In addition to this, one of the steps that the Center of Excellence took in this build is we decided to incorporate identity federation into this effort. And so what identity federation does is it allows an enterprise to accept credentials from a third party, right? So I'm a member here at NIST, and the government supports identity federation, and so I should be able to take my NIST.gov credentials and go to the Department of State and access a Department of the State record. Well, the reason that's really nice for ABAC is that when you send that identity information over, what the user did to authenticate, you can actually send users attributes as well and allow that system that's on the Department of State side to make an access decision on me as a user from NIST. And so a lot of organizations today, as they begin to collaborate across organizations and they need to share resources across organizations, this has become a large portion of their user base. And so we wanted to account for that in this building block. And so we set out with a few basic goals. And so we wanted to implement 3 major capabilities, and that was to provide a standards-based service that supports identity and attribute federation and fine-grained access decisions. We wanted to demonstrate some security capabilities and show how they support that wider range of risk postures as I talked about, because you can get fine-grained with those attributes. And then we wanted to demonstrate a source for and the use of some environmental attributes, and we've done that in this build. And then of the business value at a very high level really is we help to simplify identity management. We wanted to show how we can share IT resources across multiple enterprises, again, that identity federation piece. And then, of course, reduce risk through the highly flexible access control mechanism. And so, as I mentioned before, with every NCCoE project, we team up with a series of partners. You're probably already aware that we've teamed up with NextLabs because you're on this webinar, but we've teamed up with several other companies too, and I wanted to just give you guys a quick overview of those companies and the products we use. So the resource server in this case, the area where the files are being held that the user is trying to access is Microsoft SharePoint, and so we teamed up with Microsoft in this effort. We had need for a certificate authority. There's just a lot of best practices in implementing certificate authorities and using things like mutual TLS, and Symantec provided us with that. We needed a federation service to get identities and attribute information from one enterprise to another enterprise, and Ping Identity provided that. We wanted to provide for two-factor authentication, and so we leveraged RSA adaptive authentication for that. And then we were also able to leverage RSA's adaptive authentication as a source of environmental attributes to demonstrate some of the interesting data points you might want to collect for access decisions at the time of authentication. And then, of course, we worked with NextLabs, who provided the core of sort of the ABAC functionality for this build, and they provided us with their Control Center entitlement management suites, which, from an ABAC perspective, act as a policy enforcement point, which is trapping every user's access request, a policy decision point, which is the decision logic that's going to say whether or not the user can access the information requested, and then a policy management point, that centralized management and auditing that I talked about earlier is fulfilled by that piece of technology. And so in the build, here are the 6 major things that we accomplished. And I'm keeping this at a rather high level. I have plenty of architecture diagrams that we could show here, but those are rather laborious to go through, and so I would encourage anybody who wants a little more detail than this to actually go to the NCCoE site and look at the practice guide, and then email us or call us with any questions. But in this build, this is what we were able to accomplish. So we were able to implement user authentication, two-factor authentication with RSA-AA, and we created what we call an authentication context. And so when the user authenticates, there's a piece of JavaScript that goes into the browser and grabs some interesting environmental data points, such as what's the IP address of the user, what is the geolocation of that user, what type of browser are they trying to access from, what type of language like Java is that browser using. All of these are potential data points that might be useful to an enterprise when making access decisions. And for anybody interested in those actual data points, I believe that they're very similar to the Mozilla browser fingerprinting data points, which you can Google and find out a little more about. We were able to federate user and identity attribute information between two organizations. So a user authenticates a user at organization A, and then we send that information after the authentication to organization B to make access decisions upon. As I mentioned before, we use the NextLabs capability to do some fine-grained access control within that SharePoint application. So one of the things that affects the granularity of access decisions is how closely coupled your policy enforcement point is with the application. And in this case, we had a very closely coupled policy enforcement point provided by NextLabs with SharePoint. We demonstrate the creation of attribute-based policy definitions. We included a secondary attribute request, and this is, for those guys who are more technical, this is more about an efficiency in identity federation. So being able to ad hoc get one-off attributes as needed. And then, of course, we are allowing attributes or access decisions for external identities. As I mentioned before, they make up a large portion these days of the enterprise user base. And we've done that in a way where you don't actually need to pre-provision the actual user, and so that decreases the sort of administrative overhead on a lot of the IT staff within the organization. And so, as I mentioned, we published a practice guide just yesterday, and so I wanted to give you guys a feel for what you would see inside of that practice guide. And so we've broken the guide down into 3 volumes, and the volume A is specifically for those of you who are executives. It's only 2 pages long and includes all the pertinent information that you might need. And so if you're at that level, we've tailored that document for you. Volume B is meant for more of the management level, or CISOs. People are going to have some technical understanding, and we really get in depth into the architecture and its components in that volume. And then volume C, which makes up a large portion of the guide, is actually for implementers. So if you want to see exactly what we did, the configuration files, the actual code that we put in place, all of the architecture diagrams, you can look at volume C and get an idea for what we've used there. What else you'll get in this guide is actually a mapping of security characteristics to NIST standards and best practices, and also external standards and best practices, which most organizations find very useful for compliance, or find very useful in general if they're putting together a system security plan. They want to understand how they're going to meet these controls. Obviously, we've put together a detailed solution, and that is represented in volume C. We provide detailed instructions for implementers, and that's also in volume C. And then we've included all the products we've used inside the guide that you'll see are all commercially available. So these are things that you could procure today or download today and begin implementing and using inside of your environment. So quickly going on to next steps. As I said, the document was published just yesterday. It's NIST 1800-3, and the public comment period for that document is over. It's a draft, and comments will be open for roughly 2 months. So I believe the period closes at December 4th, so right after the Thanksgiving holiday. And then we're actually going to do a second build underneath this ABAC project, and we just put out a Federal Register notice that invites the IT vendor community to come and talk with us about what's going to be in that second build. So if you are an IT vendor on this particular call, you can go to the Federal Register notice and search for NCCoE, and you'll find us. And we're also looking to talk with business persons about what type of capabilities they would like to see in the second build, or what type of specific requirements they may have for an ABAC system that we might be able to include in this build. And so the contact information you're getting ready to see in one slide from now is there for you guys to reach out to us and communicate with us on a one-on-one basis. And there is that contact information, so you can feel free to call us or email us. You're literally 1 degree of separation from us. If you email abac.nccoe@nist.gov, it floods my inbox, so please don't spam it. But please do reach out to me, and I'll be happy to set up a time to talk with anybody one-on-one about the current effort that we've just done in the practice guide, or about the future ABAC effort, or any other NCCO efforts for that matter. We have several listed on our website that individuals in this webinar may be interested in. And so with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Roger, who will talk a little bit about the NextLabs products that we use in this build. And then after that, I believe we'll have a Q&A session.
All right. Thank you, Bill. So as everyone can see, Bill left his cell phone number here, so any calls 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning will probably be greatly appreciated. So let's see if we can move to the next slide here. All right, so we've had the pleasure of working here with Bill for during the duration of this ABAC build. So it's been a very exciting project, and we've had a lot of interesting discussions. So I just want to talk a little bit about the NextLabs approach. So what we really do is we do three different things. So we help you identify your sensitive assets. So this could be anything from your data, structured data in databases, or unstructured data that might be sitting in file systems or document management systems or in the cloud or anywhere else. And once you identify that, we help you classify that information. And the reason we classify it is so we can determine what is the information that we really want to go and protect and write policies around. So protection is really what Bill has been talking about here, based on attribute-based access control. So we can take data classifications and other types of metadata about the information or the applications that you want to protect, and write policies and rules around how that should be protected. So some examples of classifications could be the sensitivity of the document, or what project it refers to, or whether it's export regulated content, or an insurance claim or something else. So that's part of the story here. So we help you protect the information wherever it's stored, and your applications as well. So what you see here is some examples of integrations that we provide out of the box. This is anything from SAP to Office 365 and SharePoint and so forth. And we also help you protect the information and data in these systems once they leave your enterprise, or once you share the information with other users. So I might download some documents on a thumb drive. I might send an email with this information, or upload it into cloud. So we can automatically also apply rights protection policies, so EDRM policies to documents and unstructured content, and therefore basically put a security envelope and encryption envelope around that information, and then control who can access that piece of information. So the third leg here is also, of course, we want to be able to understand what are all the assets that we have. We want to be able to protect them and secure them, and make sure that people can collaborate and share this information in a secure fashion. But you also want to be able to centrally monitor and audit the access and activity logs, if you will, right? So we have built a set of solutions that allow you to keep track of what's going on across all your systems, where the data goes, what people do with it, and so forth, and also set up alerts and notifications when there's certain patterns that are met, so to report on suspicious activities so people can go and take a look at it. So all this stuff is based on what we call our dynamic authorization platform. So this is really our policy platform that allows you to define rules and policies in a business-friendly, natural language type of environment, whereas you can define rules around how data should be classified, how we protect it using attribute-based access control, whether we should rights protect the information if it meets certain criteria, and also doing some other things around where the documents should be stored and located in the archive and so forth. So if you take that to the next level, so the dynamic authorization platform is based on our NextLabs Control Center offering. So Bill mentioned that a bit. So that's the core of all our solutions that we do here at NextLab. On top of that, we have built two different product lines. One is our entitlements management product line. So this is a set of pre-integrated solutions for the key mission-critical applications that our customers are using, and they've been telling us that they need support for. So examples here include anything from what you saw in the previous slide to I can also build integrations into mobile applications or any other application for that matter that may need fine-grained authorization capabilities for whatever various use cases a client might have. So for homegrown applications, we provide a set of SDKs. This could be anything from Java APIs to C# for the Microsoft environment to things for the cloud environment and AJAX applications like REST and SOAP and web services and so forth. So quite a complete set of toolkits there for people to integrate with. And so that's entitlements management, and really helps you then protect your application. So who can access your application, what they can do with it within that application, what kind of business transactions they are able to submit and perform, and also what data they're allowed to see and what they can do to that data. So might have need-to-know policies to restrict what kind of customers or orders or any other sensitive information I might need to restrict from end-user visibility and then what they can do with that information. So that sort of describes structured data, if you will. So on the right-hand side, we have our other product line, which is our rights management, EDRM offering. So this is based on a core server solution that we have that you can host in the cloud or in enterprise, and it helps you protect your unstructured content, so documents of any kind. So they could be Office documents or PDF files or CAD models or even audio-video files. And like I mentioned earlier, by putting a security envelope around those files, an encryption envelope around those files. And I can now use attribute-based access control policies to determine who should be able to open up that document and whether it can copy it, whether it can save it, whether it can share it with their colleagues or print it or whatever may be the case. So there's quite a lot of different advanced type of capabilities there. And again, the EDRM offering here is also based on not only on our attribute-based access control dynamic authorization platform, but also leverages the data classification capabilities and other things that we support. So the unstructured content, once you have protected it, so again, we can define automated rules that say, if a particular piece of information meets certain criteria, it's sensitive or top secret or relates to a certain project, then we can automatically protect it when we identify and find that piece of information in the system, or we can have end users classify that information as well. But once it has been classified and protected, then when you share it and make it available to other users, then we have different offerings where we can integrate either into your desktop environment, or you can access the information from your mobile device or even through a web browser and get the full fidelity and richness of whatever these files may be. So it's not just a static rendering of the content. So to go on to the next slide here, and just to wrap up, so in the interest of time. So NextLabs, we've been around for quite some time. We started back in 2004. We have over 150 people across 2 different continents here. So our headquarters are in the San Francisco Bay Area in San Mateo. We have offices across the states, and we also have development centers outside of the U.S. So our core specialty, and you might have been seeing that based on what I talked about earlier, is really to protect your applications and data. So when we look at the security landscape today, a lot of clients have been investing in network perimeter-based security solutions. So I'm trying to build firewalls and other type of things around my enterprise to keep people from getting into my enterprise systems and get access to that information, but also to make sure that none of that information leaks out. And all of us, what we see in the news on a daily basis is in a number of different data breaches. So those solutions don't really work by themselves anymore. They need to be part of any enterprise architecture. But what we really focus on here is securing the core assets, which is the applications and the data. So our solutions are more data-centric, if you will. And based on that, now, if information leaves my enterprise, I have certain departments using cloud solutions or SaaS solutions, or they need to collaborate with suppliers or vendors and business partners or other agencies and so forth. Then clearly, I now need to either invite external people into my systems, or I need to have my information now just stored outside of my the boundaries of my organization. So that's what we mean by making sure that extending the reach of existing security solutions and making sure that your data is protected, whether it's in the enterprise or outside of the enterprise. So we have a large number of clients, a lot of it in the aerospace and defense industry, insurance, financial services. We have a lot of federal agencies looking at our solutions and using our solutions in various different agencies. I won't go into details right now. And we also have, over the last few years, developed some very close partnerships with other vendors in and software suppliers. So examples include SAP. So SAP is now reselling our solutions. So it's SAP Dynamic Authorization by NextLabs. So our core integrations with SAP and with the SAP environment are now available from SAP themselves. We have also built and worked with the Siemens team on integrating their CAD tools and their PLM products, so Siemens Teamcenter, so for providing integrated rights management and document control type capabilities. And then we also have Microsoft here, so we have worked very, very closely with Microsoft to, and they're helping us go into their client base and promote the attribute-based access control solutions that we have and for the Microsoft environment, so SharePoint and Office 365 and so forth. And of course, we also here have worked with Bill and the NIST organization, but we also are involved in driving a lot of the standards efforts in this space. So OASIS, the EXACMO committee, OpenAC provide Open Liberty. There has been an effort there called OpenAC to provide standards-based interfaces for developers and any application to integrate with an ABAC system, and then also TSCP, which is the Trans-Global Security Collaboration Program. So with that, I think I'm going to cut it short and see if there are any questions. So Bill, there's a question here, and maybe you want to answer that one. So how does ABAC determine the location of a user? Do you want to talk to that one?
Yeah, sure. So it's going to depend on the system. Like I said before, the location of a user is an environmental attribute, and there's multiple places that you could potentially source that from. In the build that we did, and the one that's demonstrated in the practice guide, that is an attribute we got from the RSA Adaptive Authentication. And so that product, when the user authenticates, uses a bit of JavaScript to grab information about the IP address, and then does something like an ARIN lookup to actually see where the location of that IP address is. And so that's where we've gotten that type of location, but there's any number of possibilities that could have been architected into the system for grabbing that information. Just so happens that this was a capability that RSA already had, and so we leveraged it there.
Yeah, so and to expand on that, so the ABAC system can get information and attributes from anywhere. So attributes can be supplied by what in the geek speak is called enforcement point, basically the application or system where we want to enforce authorization decisions and decide what users can do or what data they can access. So that system may have certain attributes, and they can be passed into the authorization engine for evaluation. And we also have other mechanisms where we can dynamically go out to third-party systems. It could be a database or a file system, or even make a web service call to a remote IDP or anything else. Grab your credit score from Equifax as an example, and then use that as part of policy evaluation. So there's many different ways to ensure that attributes are available to the policy engine at the time we are evaluating the policies and making decisions. So there's another question here. So what about my roles? I invested a lot of time in setting up my role hierarchies and created a large number of roles in my system and maintaining these. So if I go to an ABAC system, what do I have to throw all this stuff away? And the answer is no. So a role is in an ABAC system just another attribute. So and we can get roles from roles could be anything from your AD groups to roles in an e-business suite Oracle system to roles in an SAP environment. So we can leverage those roles as an attribute, as one of the many attributes in a policy. And so think of that as a user attribute. Another user attribute could be your citizenship or your tenure or your location or department or anything like that. And then I talked a little bit earlier about attributes, document and resource attributes such as classifications and sensitivity and projects and so forth. And then the example of location is probably more of environmental attribute that where is this user at this time? So what network are they coming through? What is the time of day, and so forth. So, yeah. All right. So Bill, there's another question here. What are some of the organizations that have been deploying ABAC solutions? Do you want to talk about your experience?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So one of the efforts that the center has undertaken as part of this ABAC effort is to talk with a lot of organizations who are either looking at or have implemented ABAC solutions. Right now, there's a big push for ABAC within the government. So we've talked with entities like DHS. If you look at their Science and Technology Lab, they've teamed up with Johns Hopkins University and the identity management test bed that they have over there to build out a ABAC implementation, also using open standards over there. There's push right now within like the Department of Justice. We've had discussions with them for implementing ABAC within their for all of their user base. And then also DoD is a big user. So one of the things with DoD is you obviously have the three major branches of the military, and so there's a lot of diversity in user base there. And so DoD has been looking and it's already rolled out a lot of ABAC technology. And the cool part is the government is now also catching on with the identity federation piece. And so if anybody is familiar with the connect.gov effort, sometime in the future, we would probably see something where the connect.gov effort ties into some of these ABAC systems, and that identity federation plus ABAC could really be leveraged within the government. Within private sector, we've also talked to numerous organizations that have implemented within private sector. I can't name any specifics, but the typical sort of underlying characteristic of these organizations in private sector that are implementing ABAC is that they have a sort of single service that they're providing to a diverse user base, to multiple different types of users and multiple different types of access requests. And it falls squarely in that area where when you try to do that with roles, it really becomes laborious. And so organizations in the private sector that have looked towards this are ones where they have multiple different consumers of a single service, and that ABAC has really helped them there.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. So there's a whole ton of questions coming in here. So just in the interest of time, and I know be respectful of everyone's time here, so maybe what we can do is we can get back to everyone over email with the questions that you have. And I'm going to hand back to Tiffany.
Thank you, Bill and Roger, for a great presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. There's a survey link in the web links pod. Please make sure to take a couple seconds to fill it out and send us your feedback about this webinar. Before we end today's call, I would like to encourage all of you to reach out to me, Tiffany, to request a copy of our white paper or schedule a meeting. We'll be sending out the recording of this webinar in the next week, so please watch out for it. Again, thank you for joining us today. We hope this session has been informative for you. This concludes our NCCoE and NextLabs webinar. Bye-bye now.